This is Football at 4.
And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365, whatever the sport, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Well, I'll tell you what's never ordinary. It seems like an Eagles offseason. Whether they are good or not, they win a Super Bowl, crazy things happen. Oh, Nick Foles should be the quarterback. They make it to a Super Bowl. And here we are now. Geoff Mosher from Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com, joins me with a lot of craziness being talked about around the Eagles. Geoff Mosher, what's up, man?
Hey, Mike, what's going on? It's, we're coming up on the NFL scouting combine next week in Indianapolis. We're talking free agency and how the Eagles are going to improve their team. But I know that you're about to ask me questions, not about incoming players, but about in-house players and crazy reports. Not Derek Gunn, but other reports of weird dissension and things along those lines. Yeah, no. Yesterday, that whole report. I don't even want to say report. Just basically a theory, or I don't know what you want to call it, came out, and I don't even know that I thought to address it because I thought it sounded so ridiculous at the time. And then Derek Gunn's report came out today. Now, Derek's a guy I really respect, and I don't think he's just throwing stuff out there to see what kind of response he gets in his social media, mentions here. So I would say, do you think these are tied together? No. Are you talking about Derek's report and Craig Carton's, or just Derek's report about two different things being tied
Derek's
together?
Report and Craig Carton's. What Craig insinuated is Derek's report saying, yes, there may have been something to that.
I'm not the one to do that, to draw parallels, cause and effect, to even address the kind of report or innuendo or wherever you want to call it from Craig Carton. He didn't want to elaborate. He put it out there. That's his cross to bear. I do think Derek's is more. It relates to something Adam and I spoke about maybe a couple of weeks ago when the season ended on Inside the Birds podcast about Jalen Hurts. And if you look past the not so great year as a quarterback, not a terrible year, just obviously not the year before, but some of the issues that we had heard and talked about and discussed on the podcast were that people had observed that, he had the big contract. He did present himself at times as someone feeling the weight of that. And that in general, his body language and his leadership when things were not great there at the end of the year, last 5, 6, 7 weeks, was not great. And that's something he needs to work on. So that part of Derek Gunn's tweet makes a lot of sense and is something that we've discussed based on what we heard. You even heard players, Mike, in the locker room at times after some of those games saying, hey, we need to keep our heads up. Hey, our body language needs to be better. I believe Lane Johnson and Jason Kelce both made remarks toward the end of the year about body language. And if you look at Jalen Hurts, his body language when things were going south was not of a guy rallying the troops, but of a guy kind of sitting on the bench brooding, probably mad at himself, knowing Jalen. I don't think it's not a finger pointing thing. It's just when your team needs a lifeline, when it needs a pick me up, the quarterback needs to be the one that provides it. And I think you've made a really good point over the last hour or so saying that, he's always been the underdog who has doubted and been able to prove everybody. And now he's in a position where he's already proven it. He did the year before, and now he's got to continue to lift up others. And maybe he's not built that way. Maybe he feels everybody's got to be like him, that when your back's against the wall, you got to try harder. You got to do more. Now, when you're a quarterback, you got to be adaptable and throw your hand or your arm around the shoulder of a teammate who might not be wired like you. So that's a learning lesson for Jalen Hurts to be able to take in to the next year. And then the second part of it, I heard you say, and I agree with it. If Nick Sirianni's entire emotional barometer is controlled by the head of security, then that's an issue. And listen, we've talked about Nick's attitude, his hot-headedness a lot this year on the podcast. I don't like to just go on my own. I've talked to a lot of people around the league, and I get a very mixed opinion on how he carries himself. There are people I've talked to who thinks that the way he carries himself, you guys mentioned the Kansas City game and other times, is unbecoming of a head coach. There are people who I talk to who say, you can't not be who you are. And if that's who you are and your players are okay with it and react well to it, then that's who you are and you don't care what the outside thinks. So I don't know that there's one answer, Mike, but I would say I personally think it's problematic if you need your own personal thermometer taker, right? If you need somebody to cool you down from getting into sideline squabbles, then you need to look at yourself as a head coach in the mirror. And I think Nick Sirianni has actually said that, right? In one press conference, he said, I got to do a better job on the sideline of controlling my temper. Now, could that be a real I got to do a better job or a coach speak I got to do a better job? I don't know. But just like Jalen Hurts, I think a lot of things that have happened this offseason have probably humbled up Nick Sirianni too. So I would imagine he's looking in the mirror.
Yeah, and listen, I don't know if there's any, if you can recall, like, yeah, maybe there was a few, but like, was anything that Nick did on the sideline, does it stand out so much that was a factor in them completely collapsing?
No, but I mean, as a head coach of a team, you're constantly preaching to your team, keep composed. Let's not have dumb penalties. Let's make sure we're mentally tougher than our opponent. Let's make sure we're more disciplined than our opponent. How do you preach that, but have numerous instances where you lose control on the sideline or you start yelling at the other team in a preseason game when your quarterback gets hurt, Robert Saleh, or when you are pointing at Pete Carroll because he puts his offense back on the field during a review that hasn't been like, you see, there are probably 5 or 6 times where you can think of Nick Sirianni interactions on the sideline that are not what you typically see from an NFL head coach. And you know how it is. The fans, they love it. They crave it. They like that stuff. But NFL people don't always love it and crave it and like that stuff.
So just for the people tuning in and are like, what's going on here? Derek Gunn, veteran Eagles reporter, has been around this team for a while, not a sensationalist type of guy, says, according to sources, Jalen Hurts' big contract pulled him in numerous directions on and off the field and put under a lot of pressure that he didn't handle well. So I guess to further that conversation is, does that concern you to hear that, like, maybe he just isn't the face of a franchise that you hope your quarterback is and that you almost need your quarterback to be?
It concerns me if we're talking about this again at this time next offseason. I'm a big proponent of you got to give a player a chance to grow some. You got to give a coach a chance to grow some. You know, I didn't think firing Nick Sirianni would be a good idea in the offseason. And I think Nick Sirianni, like I said, has to look in the mirror and say, what do I need to do better? What do I need to do differently without changing who I am? Can he be an emotional guy at times? Yeah, nobody's saying you can't be emotional. Pete Carroll's emotional. Other guys who have had success in the NFL have shown emotion. It's just how far you're going to take it. Are you squabbling with players on the sideline more than once or twice? Are you talking to fans in the stadium as you exit? Are you know, because that stuff follows you throughout your career. And I'm sure the Kansas City fans are having the last laugh right now as they won a Super Bowl and Nick Sirianni had a slide. So either that or you got to have the most thickest skin in the world, Mike, and the best job security in the world to be able to get away with that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
Even the great Bobby Knight could not get away with that for too much longer at Indiana before they eventually said, you know, it's been a long time since that undefeated season of yours. And there's been a lot of infractions. There's been a lot of, you know, words coming out of your mouth, a lot of actions. And then, you know, the late Bobby Knight, by the way, I should say. But, you know, that's my point is that even the most talented, if they can't keep it in check, then it's eventually going to come back to them.
Yeah, well, the second part of the report, I read the first part. Big Dom, when he got suspended, according to Derek Gunn, he controls Sirianni's emotions on the sideline. In his absence, Nick gets in numerous arguments with players, coaches during games. And I asked, you know, just randomly, you know, which of these is more concerning? It's got to be the Sirianni part of this, right? I mean, that one's the one that you're like, you really need to have Big Dom on the sideline. Like, people were joking at the point, it's Big Dom getting suspended. That ruined the season. And then here we are in February saying, did that have something to do with the team falling apart? I mean, it's crazy to think.
It's wild. I mean, the whole story of Dom, to me, is one of the most fascinating stories in the NFL because I don't know of any other head of security who is as important, who gets as much airtime. I remember being a kid in high school, Mike, you probably felt the same way, thinking to myself, there is not a special teams coordinator who's ever been in this game who gets more attention and video airtime than the Cowboys got Joe Avasano. Remember, he was all like, I'm like, this guy's a special teams coordinator. You'd think he was the president of the damn team. And that's the way it feels like with Dom. I mean, I walked out of my gym the other day where my daughters go take their instructions, and a guy walks in and he's wearing a free Dom sweatshirt. And I'm like, and I love Dom, by the way. I consider Dom like a friend. He's a good guy. I see him everywhere. He's really one of the nicest guys. Very mellow, by the way, too. Most people think he's like, always getting into. No, the reason why he's Nick Sirianni's other guy is because he can mellow something out. But seeing free Dom sweatshirts now all over my neighborhood is just very odd. The whole Dom story is very weird in general. But yeah, I would say this though, Mike. Coach, I don't know if the public knows this as much, but coaches squabble a whole lot on the sideline or on the headphone to their coordinators or the guys up in the booth. They're constantly arguing about go for it, don't go for it, constantly calling out different plays. I want this, you want that. So I don't want people to think that it's always smooth and hunky-dory on the sidelines or up in the booths, the communication. There's a lot of MFing going on every single team, every single Sunday, Thursday night, and Monday. But it's different when you're physically doing it, in front of everybody or your players too. Yeah. I mean, there has to be a line that you don't cross.
Geoff Mosher, Football 4. So the Hurt stuff, how do you interpret are you interpreting him saying, look, he just had a lot of meetings and not meeting, but like, interviews and sponsor stuff that maybe was just like he wasn't prepared for, or do you think it's more than that?
Well, I think that might be a part of it. A guy who's so regimented and so routine, certainly, he was in a lot of commercials. He had things going on outside of football last offseason that were probably taking him away. But that to me is not a connection to how you're carrying yourself as a leader, how you're helping young players or players who are alongside you grow, develop, keep their calm. I just think his leader, I know we talked about what a great leader he was, and he is. There's a difference, right, between leading by example, which I think he's done a pretty darn good job of over the course of his NFL and college career. But then there's a difference between that and then sort of also leading by how you react to your teammates, how you treat them, how you know that everybody is wired differently and what it takes to get the best out of everybody. Jalen Hurts clearly knows what it takes to get the best out of himself. I think he also has to understand what it takes to get the best out of his teammates when things aren't great.
Yeah.
And 2 years ago, it's like they never really had a patch of adversity. Last year they did, and they didn't handle it well.
Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, do you lend any credence to the Carton stuff? Like, have you talked to people, sent any text? I know I was on with McMullen this morning. He said he did text a source. They shot it right down. I know Adam Schefter has been on the record on Philly station and said nothing to it, but I give you a chance to say something about it, I guess.
I really got nothing to say. I mean, no one's told me that, Adam and I are as plugged in as
I guess I only asked the question.
Know everything, but
right. I only asked the question because
And
I asked the question only because a couple of years ago there was an article about Wentz the guy got blasted for, and it turns out that he wasn't wrong about it 2 years later, and nobody remembers 2 years down the line. Hey, that guy was right about that, but at this stage. You're essentially saying no credence to what you're hearing there, or what he's saying.
I'm
there.
almost saying I'm not reacting to it because something very well could have happened. I don't know, but the point is, like,
he was just so vague about it,
right? And we speak to people every day, and you would think some of the remnant of that would have crept in. Now, the thing with the Joe Santoliquito article from years ago, and not to be patting ourselves on the back, but when that came out, Adam and I. We were just sort of starting Inside the Birds at that time because it was right after the Super Bowl, going into 2018. And one of the things we said going into that year was you've got no more John DeFilippo, and this is a guy who really held Carson accountable. They had a good working relationship. It was always respectful, but it wasn't always agreement. John really had to coach Carson. And once he left and Frank left and you started to have Press Taylor involved, we questioned whether or not Carson was going to be able to adapt to somebody who wasn't the same way with him. And it turned out to be very true. And that was a big part of Joe Santoliquido's article too. So we read a lot of that and said, you know what, Joe's not only onto something, but we've discussed some of this with Carson. We knew it was coming. We knew that he could be a hard-headed quarterback. So again, I'm not saying nothing happened, like there's no situation. Maybe something did happen, but it's not as big of a deal as Carton suggesting. I don't know. It just never hit my ears.
All right, Jeff, couple free agent things. I don't know that you get the Jimmy Shapiro odds, but they got sent to me right before the show. I thought they were some interesting ones, including running backs. Austin Eckler, Eagles, 6-1. Derrick Henry, Eagles, 5-1. Saquon Barkley, Eagles, 10-1. Tony Pollard, Eagles, not only were they 5-1, they were the favorite to land Tony Pollard. So you put any stock that the Eagles will be big name hunting in free agency at running back?
The history of organization tells you to not let Vegas have your money on that one, because it's not that the Eagles don't pay running backs. They paid LaShawn McCoy, paid Brian Westbrook. They pay guys that they groom into electrifying 3-down running backs at a time where they can get those guys under a team-friendly contract. When's the last time they went out in free agency and got themselves a running back that they were going to pay?
DeMarco Murray, I guess.
Yeah, that is. But that really wasn't the Eagles. That was Chip Kelly, who is a totally different kind of coach. And
I don't know what they paid. I don't know what they paid LeGarrette, but I mean,
that was a 1-year deal.
Yeah,
they got him in May. So that to me. Now, I will say this. I do think the running back market, and I heard you say this, and I agree with you, I don't think it's going to be as good as the running backs hope it will be. I don't think that if you have this many running backs, Saquon, Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, and Derrick Henry, let's say they all sign deals, right? Decent deal, whatever it is. That's 4 teams that just arm themselves with a running back. How many more teams are going to be out there looking to spend money on running back? Not too many here. Teams aren't trying to buy running backs anyway. So that makes it hard for guys like Austin Eckler or what are some of the other names you mentioned there?
Pollard, Derrick Henry, Eckler, Saquon.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think 6 teams are going to go out there and spend even mid-sized contracts on 6 running backs, right? So to me, DeAndre Swift, that's the name. It sort of hurts DeAndre Swift, in my opinion, unless the team falls in love with him. But it makes it easier for the Eagles to maybe want to bring him back on a 1-year deal. DeAndre may say this is not the year to be a free agent with so much competition and so few teams wanting to spend on running back. So I'll sign a 1-year deal with the Eagles and try to have another good year like I just did, stay healthy. And then next year, maybe there'll be more money. But I like Miles Sanders signed for $6 million. That was the highest last year. I don't know if Barkley is going to get that. I mean, I know he's a better athlete than Miles Sanders, and I don't think he's special. I think he's a special athlete, but not a special running back. Derrick Henry is probably going to be the type of guy who goes to a run-first team like a Baltimore, like maybe the Chargers with Harbaugh there. Like I'm trying to think of another run-first team, maybe a Miami, like that. He might be a good 1-year, 2-year deal, by the way. He's still a pretty decent running back who had a decent year on a really, really bad team. Would he come to the Eagles? I think only if he had no takers and he wanted to sign a 1-year deal and it was below market value, and if he understood that he was going to be a part of a committee of sorts, or at least two-headed running back show.
Right. Geoff Mosher, it's going to be an interesting offseason if this is the way it's starting, obviously. and by the way, I say this because it felt like everybody was saying it'll come out. It'll eventually come out, like what happened with this team, because nobody can accept what they saw and just say, it happens, because no, it doesn't happen like it happened this season. And that's why everyone's like, okay, I'm just waiting for something to come out. And I guess we're getting little breadcrumbs leading us down the path of destruction for the 2023 Philadelphia Eagles.
Well, I would say, and I think you probably would agree here, most people would, that even if you picked two random high-profile players on the Eagles and said those guys hated each other and had a real big issue, that doesn't explain why 11 to 13 other Eagles and coaching staff, coaches on the coaching staff, all of a sudden were pretty terrible too, right? Like, as bad, unless this was like a civil war, which we would have, I mean, come on, that would have been obvious, right? Unless it was like that, it doesn't really explain why everybody seemingly took a step back last year.
Geoff Mosher, the Inside the Birds podcast, it dropped, and you can take a listen to their look at some of the offensive free agents that might be appealing to the Philadelphia Eagles. That's wherever you get your podcast, and just search for Inside the Birds to find that. Geoff Mosher and Adam Kaplan lay down those tracks, and they'll be here on Football at 4 all off season long. Thanks, Jeff.
You got it.